The scene is set. Eucalyptus.
Invasive albino king snakes.
Emerald ash borer and its parasitoids.
The world's largest amphibians.
The invasive species that is humans. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Nicholas. Welcome to the Anthropocene. Here, since, we're going to be doing like the just talking into stuff, we might as well record our pre-talks and stuff. Like, what if I say something hilarious and we don't catch it on camera,
Exactly. And we want the reunion to be legit.
Right, yeah. But then if we acknowledge the
you?
reunion, then we have to acknowledge the fact that we're really bad at making this podcast, at least like consistently, right? And I refuse to do that.
We've been consistently good at being inconsistent, if that helps.
Exactly. You can expect inconsistency from the Anthropocene podcast.
Right? That's everything. So.
All right. Well, then, shall we get into it? And
Yeah,
first off, start off by saying Happy Halloween to all of you nerds and witches and ghouls and non-binary creatures. What's up?
Yeah, happy Halloween. So excited. I haven't done a Halloween in a long time, actually, dressed up and gone out.
I think I might have to this year, to be honest. I've always had costumes the last few years. I've just never actually really worn them. I have costumes sitting at my house, but I just don't have the time to get into them, or for some reason I just don't do it. But maybe I'll do a Halloween photo shoot this year instead of a sexy overall photo shoot that I normally do.
Do you have a costume ready now?
I've got Dark Link from The Legend of Zelda. It's all black leather and stuff, which can be used as a bunch of different stuff. So that's one of them. I've got a sword, which is related to that. I'm not just telling you that I have a sword.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, that could be fun.
Right.
We'll be waiting for Nicholas all in leather photos then.
Yes, yeah, I'll have to make it somehow scantily clad to really fit with my typical photo vibe, but we'll figure it out. So, yeah, I guess we do have to address the elephant in the room, which is that we haven't posted in, just a very long time. And pretty much every time we start a new episode, we talk about how we're really sorry about that. And we're still really sorry about that, but maybe not as much as usual because we've both just been just really overwhelmed with life and our careers and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily something that we think is based on us not being willing to or being lazy or anything like that. We're definitely we haven't had the mental capacity to take on additional projects on top of everything that we're all working on. And in that regard, Kirsten, do you want to talk about some of the things, the positive things that you've been working on a little bit, just to give everybody, some sort of factual evidence that we are actually busy and I'm not just talking out of my ass right now?
Well, I have a lot of different things going on, but I guess one that's cool is I'm actually working on a paper about invasive species.
Ooh.
Ants and keto. Not going to give away too much of that.
When she says paper, by the way, she means publication, correct?
Yeah.
We're not just talking about writing a paper for a class here. We're talking about real science. Real science. We're real scientists here.
Yes, right. I should say a research article
that
should hopefully be out. So when that gets out and published for realsies, we can do an episode on that. I did take it to the entomological conference in Ecuador, and I won first place for my memes, so that was exciting.
What? Wait, explain that to me because I don't. What do you mean? Was there a meme category?
No, but I had memes and jokes and fun things spread throughout my presentation, and people really liked it.
Okay.
So I'm actually giving a talk on Thursday with the Entomological Society for how to use memes in science and connect with an audience. So that's gonna be fun.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah, congratulations on all that.
Thanks. And there's other things, but I guess that's the big one.
Right. Yeah. No, that's awesome. That is cool. So, guess I should probably explain away why I've been also busy. I had a lot of personal things going on in my life for quite a while that I had to deal with, and that was probably like the overarching thing. But in positive news, today I actually just officially dropped my educational poster series that I've been working on. And if you follow me on Instagram at Nature Nerd Nicholas, those will be available in the next couple of weeks, probably right after the time that you're listening to this podcast air. They will be available for sale. So check those out. There will also be some, spoiler alert, salamander and frog stickers from an artist friend of mine that will be available for sale, as well as my additional prints and whatnot. So that's like the main thing, I guess, that's been like recent. And on top of that, I've kind of just been doing a lot of educational outreach and focusing a lot more on my management of the natural areas and all that kind of stuff, and what better ways I can do different outreach. I'm sure there's like some awards and stuff I've won recently that are worth note, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. I know I won a photography contest, but I think I also won a couple awards for some presentation stuff. But I'm really more proud about the educational posters right now. I'm trying to plug that for myself so I can get a little more money. But yeah, so I mean, we both had a lot of stuff going on. Kirsten's is more science related. Mine is more science communication related, which is actually the reverse of how our typical stuff goes. Usually I feel like you're more on the science communication, like outreach type stuff. And I'm more on the stuck in a pond doing turtle research type whatnot. But we should probably tell them what we have in store for them today, because it is, as every episode of the Anthropocene, we're doing something new and special for the Halloween season.
Okay, but this one is actually, for real life, something different and a little bit fun. So we thought, if I may, we thought for Halloween it would be fun to explore something a little less real, perhaps, and look at how that could be an invasive species. So it's gonna kind of have the structure of what you're used to, maybe, but definitely look a little different. So we're each gonna do kind of like a mini episode we're gonna bring back the debate round a little bit, kind of at the end. But other than that, yeah, it's Halloween themed. We're gonna get spooky.
Yeah, boo. That was the first noise that came to my mind when I thought spooky Halloween noises. That wasn't a boo to your fantastic speech there. But yeah, also, if this is your first episode of the Anthropocene podcast, listen to a different one. This is not this is going to be a great episode. It's going to be really fun, but it is not what we typically are doing. Please go and check out some of the other content that we've released previously, because that is going to be more in the realm of what we're doing. We are going to use our knowledge as scientists and specialists in invasive species to basically outline, let's call them mythical monsters as far as invasive species go. And I don't want to give away too much because I think we probably both kind of set each of ours up as a small surprise. Mine will be quickly evident what I'm talking about, but I don't want to give everything away. I want it to just start off spooky. So without further ado, cue the spooky music, future Nicholas, who is editing this video. The scene is set. You walk alone on a cobbled path on a cool autumn night. Your heels click along the ancient road as the wind blows the last of the leaves from their tenuous grip amongst the branches. You stop, a slow exhale followed by an unintentional holding of your breath as your ears twinge to focus on something behind you. You reluctantly turn around, slowly. You try to pinpoint the source of the noise. Your eyes begin to dart to every tree, bush, dark, shadowy area that you can see. The light from the lamp above you begins to flicker ever so slightly, illuminating indiscernible shapes in the night. Are they getting closer? Is it the wind? Shadows? Twigs snap around you in quick succession. Rather than run, your legs remain frozen in place as the blood begins to pump through your body. You try to focus your hearing again, but all sounds are being replaced by the constant thudding of the blood rushing to your head as your fear overflows from your body. Adrenaline pumping and your heart pounding, you snap back to reality just as you feel a cold chill on your neck. Your heart drops in your chest and you whirl around in a frenzied panic to see nothing. The blood drains from your head slowly as you catch your breath. Fear is overtaken by reason. You're a scientist, and this is the real world where monsters don't exist. Thankfully, mercifully. You turn back around to go home and feel the blood drain from your face. A pale figure meets your gaze, but before you can gasp, a crushing hand is placed over your mouth and the flesh is ripped from your neck. The last sensations you feel as you drift into the darkness are an overwhelming cold and an unmistakable hunger for the scent of blood that stains and pools the cobbled walk. And hello! Now we get into it. Here we go. Halloween stuff. I'm psyched. Spooky time. How was that?
That was perfect.
Cool. I'm going to put spooky sounds in there, and I might try and startle people when they're listening.
Very
and
good.
If you got startled by that in the editing process, blame future Nicholas, not this Nicholas right here, because that's his problem. Like we kind of talked about, this Halloween episode is going to be basically taking real scientific evidence of what we know of different invasive species and how they function and applying them to the monsters. And because I came up with the idea, got to choose first, and I picked vampires because I thought that was probably the easiest one to go about. Let's be honest. I think it's pretty easy to make vampires into an invasive species if you go by how we typically interpret them. But because I'm me and because I can't do anything normally, I wanted to give myself a couple restrictions. So before we get into it, we're kind of operating under the assumption that we live in a world where a vampire-like creature has already evolved. We won't be discussing the evolution of these creatures because that's kind of outside the realm of our knowledge between Kirsten and I. But we can discuss how we think these creatures could become invasive and how they would potentially become the most deadly invasive species in the world. And of course, with all of that comes a few caveats, right? Because we're operating in the scientific world at this point. So even though we know that this is fictional, there are a few things that we're going to have to remove about vampires. And I'm not sure if you did the same with your werewolves.
I actually didn't even do werewolves. So, yeah. It's okay. It's a surprise.
So, perfect. I don't know if you did the same with your mystery thing. I do know what you did because you just told me before we started recording and I immediately forgot. But I guess with yours, though, yours is kind of more based in a realm as far as like realistic possibilities.
I laid out some ground rules.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, like but folklore and fantasy and books and movies always have a bit of a variation of any of these kinds of Halloween monsters or things you think about as what is a ghost, what is a vampire, what is all these other kinds of things. So I think you can lay out some ground rules for sure to kind of make more sense.
Right, because if we give all of the vampires all the powers that you sometimes see them have in movies and stuff, then of course they're going to be they're basically superpowered. So we're going to remove everything that I consider to be a quote unquote superpower and not something that could be naturally evolved or is likely to evolve. And that's kind of like the barriers I gave myself to operate within the confines of like making this more realistic as far as, as realistic as we can go. Because we are a science podcast. So we are trying to be remotely scientific. That should be our new tagline, actually, for the podcast. The Anthropocene Podcast, remotely scientific. Okay, so yeah, like I said, no superpowers. So that means they cannot turn into bats or fly at all. They can have strength that is greater than a human, but nothing beyond the constraints of like typical physics. So they don't have like Superman strength or anything like that. They're also unable to hypnotize people via a type of magic, but I did find a workaround for that to get them more powerful and intimidating. Essentially, when we're discussing our vampires, this is what we're talking about. So I'm going to now break down essentially the vampires that I've created, the Anthropocene vampires, what we think a vampire could potentially be, or at least in our mythical world. I also have somebody who's willing to draw these vampires based on the description I give. So I don't know if they have time to do everything before we release this episode, but they will at least do vampires so that you guys will be able to get a visual of how I'm picturing them in my head, at least.
Very cool.
We're discussing basically a nocturnal species of humanoid creatures that are not necessarily humanoid. They are probably a primate or primate adjacent, where they evolved from some sort of common ancestor and split a long ass time ago. So these humanoid creatures that originated underground survive by consuming the flesh and blood of mammals and other prey that utilize these underground entrances to like caves and things like that as shelter. So this means that these creatures are gifted with slow metabolic rates and therefore would likely have cold skin, which is a defining feature of vampires, where they say they do feel like they're dead. They're no longer alive, so they have that cold to the skin touch. And a humanoid creature with cold skin would, be pretty freaky, I think. These creatures also likely would have very little skin pigmentation due to the lack of sunlight that they would experience living these like nocturnal and cave-dwelling lifestyles, which is also kind of yields to that typical vampire complexion that we typically think of. This would also explain their overall sensitivity to light. These creatures are strictly venturing towards the surface at night, where they use large eyes and heightened hearing to look for prey. So these large bat-like ears, giant eyes, and skin that is extremely photosensitive are traits that are going to create the pretty typical vampire look if we think about it. But it also explains all the myths surrounding them about being incapable of going out into the sun. So what we've got here is the most realistic representation of a vampire that I could think of without it being ridiculously unnatural looking. So it fits the description of a vampire. It's just different. It's not a human.
It's the same, but it's different.
Yeah, you can tell it's a vampire because of the way it is. We're assuming that these creatures are opportunistic and prey upon anything that ventures into their caves, which means that they are going to need to ensure that their prey is subdued quickly, because not a lot of animals are going to venture into these cave systems. And these are probably pretty large creatures. So when a meal comes by, they do need to capitalize it and make sure it does not get away, which means that we get to outfit them with some pretty serious weapons. And I've basically elected to give my vampires a paralytic venom that is administered via spurs on the limbs, similar to those that you would see in certain mammals. Mammals and marsupials, a lot of them, especially rodents, have spurs and different means to administer like different types of venom. And if you're a highly specialized type of mammal that is trying to subdue prey, then it would not be out of the realm of possibility to develop a paralytic type of venom that could help with you to overcome larger prey and secure a larger meal. The venom isn't necessarily enough to completely stop prey in its tracks, especially like larger prey, but it is enough to relax prey to the point that the creature can overcome it with numbers, strength, and of course exceptional dentition, because what's a vampire without teeth? Now that we've broken down these creatures themselves, we must determine how can they become invasive, because up until this point I've kind of limited what they can and can't do. I may have made them quite strong and have kind of like really, really good abilities for taking down prey, especially humans, but they're kind of confined to very specific areas. So, like I said, they're confined to their habitat, as venturing out would make them incredibly vulnerable. It's not that they're impervious to the sun, it's just that they don't necessarily function well in the sun. In the same way that you don't see a bat out during the day, you wouldn't see one of these vampiric creatures out during the day.
Okay, yeah, so we're not getting like that the sun burns them and they scream and run away, but maybe they are sort of blinded and super uncomfortable in that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
They are sight-based predators, therefore sight and hearing-based, but sight base primarily. It's the same thing with a deer in the headlights. The deer freeze up because they literally get overwhelmed by the cones in their eyes because they're super light receptive and the headlights are super bright, so they can't see anything, so they freeze up. So if you take one of these creatures out and put it out during the day, it doesn't know where it's going, it starts to freak out and all that kind of stuff. Right. So like I kind of just explained, this species is so very highly evolved and specialized to cave life that they'd be quite confined to these caves. Think of like pretty much all specialized cave life, like the olm or bats or something like that. Now, obviously, bats can venture out at night, and we're kind of operating with the same idea, is that these creatures are capable of venturing, but they're large creatures. They cannot fly. They can't go that far from the caves, and they're probably not venturing out too far in a general sense. They're staying pretty confined to around these areas, especially considering that these are large animals. There's not a lot of large cave habitat everywhere that could sustain like massive populations of these animals. So they'd be pretty endemic to wherever they originated. We're not talking like bears or I guess like saber-toothed cats or any sort of mammals that would, enter and leave a cave all the time, because obviously those are temporary users of these habitat. The vampires, we can start calling them that, are definitely going to require to remain within the overall habitat of the cave and the surrounding area. This means that an outside entity that operates without the confines and restrictions of the typical natural laws would have to intervene in order to get them outside of this typical habitat. So now we get to enter the most invasive species, humans, because that's probably the only way that these creatures are ever going to expand their range. And also, it's the only way that they're ever going to reach invasive status, because the invasive status is one given only to those that are spread via the influence of humans, because we make everything about ourselves. This is kind of what I picture. I'm setting up a scene now. This is how it happened. This is Emergence Day for the vampires.
Okay, we're ready.
First things first, we do have to go back in time for this to be effective. With the advent of all modern technology, transportation, and just, let's be honest, destruction of natural areas, I think that these creatures would be unable to remain undiscovered or gain any sort of foothold in modern times. So we have to turn back the clock, because the emergence day of this creature would have happened well before the overall colonization of North America. So we're going to travel back in time several hundred years before the Industrial Revolution and modernization of America, back to the time where North America was largely untouched by the greed and destruction of colonization. But where in North America? Well, how about one of the largest known cave systems in the world, the Mammoth Cave System in the southern United States. This cave system encompasses hundreds of miles of caves that have plenty of room for an undiscovered species of creature. Chickasaw Nation and absentee Shawnee peoples used to use these caves as ancestral shelters and homelands. So they're quite capable of sustaining a large carnivorous creature deep inside of them, because, we're talking about a humanoid creature here. If humans can survive there and utilize them for their benefit, then so could a very highly specialized humanoid creature. So a little background about Mammoth Cave, so we know what we're talking about. In the late 1790s, Mammoth Cave was, air quotes, discovered by white colonists. Obviously, it was known about by indigenous peoples for probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years prior to that.
Right.
A few decades later, it was mined near the entrance, likely after removing any indigenous people who may have still utilized these caves as shelter, of course. So this sounds like a group of people very deserving of meeting our monsters. I like to think that these miners would have been drunkenly camping near cave entrances, carrying equipment in and out, and of course, leaving large crates, boxes, and other sorts of supplies near the entrance for shipping. The noise and commotion of a bunch of sweaty colonists would probably keep any of these vampires from near the surface, especially if the miners are using lanterns and other light sources that are going to drive them away in general. Especially when you think of like how unaware people were back in these times, I still think that these creatures could remain largely undiscovered and unknown about, even by the miners who were operating within these caves. Perhaps some would even go missing or hear noises, but at this time period, no one would really take notice of a few miners who mysteriously disappeared down the seemingly endless caverns of the system. I mean, if you read old history and like texts and stuff like that, you find out that like people just died all the time back in the day. Like all the time. Like it was not a big deal. Like you would walk out and you would see multiple dead bodies like every day, and you'd be like, that was just how it went. So a few, like mangled and bloody bodies, especially when you're kicking indigenous people out of their ancestral homeland, and a bunch of miners wind up, like killed off because people are trying to take their rightful home place back. If you're used to that, you're not going to take notice of a few miners who go missing from some secretive vampires.
Well, and also just like pumas and bears, and there's a whole bunch of unknown things that would be around that would be dangerous at that time too. So
right, this is like wild North America we're talking about right here. We are talking about like a completely untamed wilderness where it is very easy to die. What about when the lights dimmed and the men went quiet? As they slept, the creatures would quietly emerge from their subsurface shelter, giant eyes darting around, ears twitching at any potential sound. This is how these animals would typically feed, as they evolved alongside the megafauna of North America that would shelter within these caves for millennia. They would surely capitalize on any opportunity for a meal, as they may have been few and far between. So a bunch of bags of meat sitting out in sleeping bags, basically burritos sitting out in front of your cave place, you're probably going to capitalize on that. Essentially, what they're going to be doing is sneaking up on prey to administer their toxins that we talked about earlier to avoid injury or escape from their prey. It makes sense that they would not alert any potential prey. So they're waiting for these animals to be asleep, even if they're humans, and they're going to administer that toxin, which renders them unable to move, which is my workaround for the sort of magical hypnosis of vampires. Because if you witness this, you might witness this creature go up to a person and touch them with their spur, and then that person becomes sort of complacent and unyielding as this monster just devours its flesh from the living corpse. So,
right,
fun stuff.
Checks out.
Yeah. So again, once morning comes, probably not one man would be left. They'd be consumed entirely so as not to waste any potential nutrients that are scarce in cave life. And this is where the blood-sucking part comes in. Because there's a lot of nutrients in blood, especially if you're a cave-dwelling animal. You're probably pretty iron deficient if you're not in a cave that's high in iron. Mammoth Cave is a limestone cave. I don't necessarily know what the iron content is, but I imagine that they're probably looking for it. And if you're a large mammal or, primate type creature, you need a lot of those special nutrients, and you need like big meals, even if you have a slow metabolic rate. So they're eating the bones probably, which gives them extremely strong jaws. They're slicing the flesh apart and eating every single piece. They want that marrow. They want the calcium from the bones. They want the blood and all the minerals and stuff. So it would not be uncommon to see them slurping up the pools of blood from their freshly killed victims as they lied there motionless with their eyes open, succumbing to the paralytic poison. So what do you think so far?
Seems legit. I mean, when I was thinking, I was really depending on like the easy dispersal. Oh my god, dispersal of vampires. But like, I think it's really cool that you got rid of it to make it more realistic. And they sound awful and way more terrifying than most of the vampires.
That blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I definitely, could see them. My only like argument would be maybe that they'd have to venture out more often, like in summertime, to go find big megafauna. But I mean, things like to hang around caves.
I think they would have to forcibly go out, but that also yields to their ability to become an invasive species more successfully. Because if they already have the ability to venture further in times of low food availability and whatnot, then they have probably a hardiness that would allow them to survive outside of cave life. And so we might as well just transition right into the actual invasive process, because we've introduced humans, but we haven't gotten the vampires out of the cave yet.
Right.
So the question is, how do these creatures move from one place to the next? Because they're really confined to the cave system as we've outlined them up until this point. Well, remember those crates I was talking about? Well, someone is going to come looking for the miners at some point, or just happen upon this massive cave system that is being mined for their own resources or whatever, because this is well before modern America and industrialization. People are looking for resources anywhere they can find them. And when they discover that no one is there, but the supplies remain intact and untouched, I'd like to think that they would capitalize on those supplies and load them up for themselves without question. This is early America. Those crates and tools could be vital to those people's survival, whoever they are. You'd load them up without a second thought about what might be lurking inside, which could perhaps be several vampires brooding young in a safe, confined, dark place. Perhaps the next generation of invasive species awaiting to be released into the unsuspecting world. To break that down a little bit further, many animals brood their young to ensure their survival. This is not a new practice. A ton of animals do that. Keeping yourself and your young in a small confined space is a very effective way to keep everyone safe. You're not in the open. You're not exposed to predators. Especially if you're a dark-loving creature, a dark little square box is a great place to be. Think of all the animals that capitalize on human dwellings in the dark places like our basements or our trash cans and all that kind of stuff. This is just a larger version of that. It's like the world's worst raccoon.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking of like now vampires are like cats and they like go in the boxes. And now I'm just like picturing a vampire like squatting in a cardboard box. Yeah.
If it
like
fits,
squatting.
Just
like squatting in a cardboard box in the middle of the kitchen like me.
Yeah.
Sorry, but no. It biologically totally makes sense and I love it. But my brain is just...
No, I think that's great because that's like definitely what I was picturing. It's just like them because like obviously like yeah, these creatures are monstrous as the way I portrayed them, but like they're no differently monstrous than like a lot of other species. It just happens to be that we see the animals that are capable of preying on humans as more monstrous. So the animals are probably cute at some point. Like they're probably cute babies, little cute vampire babies. I think so. I think everything's cute. So
like big old eyes and just like
right. So let's not forget, there's no cities or towns for the most part, no large cities or towns. When these crates eventually do get open, they're going to contain an extremely defensive, likely female creature that is protecting their young. And if they get out, there's not going to be a lot of people to stop these creatures. Sometimes they might be, but there's small towns, and also these people are probably just opening these crates while they're going to see what the supplies is. They probably took them because they didn't want the people to come back and claim their supplies just in case. So they probably loaded them up real quick and then took off, and then a few days later they'd open them, much to their shocking surprise. Since humans are diurnal, we're probably going to check what's in the crates we just stole during the day. That makes sense. Why would you look at it at night? Now, our fictional vampires are not weak to the sun. You've got to remember that. They just likely be overwhelmed by the heat and light. Essentially, that's going to amplify any defensive behaviors that these animals are going to have. So you're not just going to crack open a box and be met with a startled, cute puppy dog-eyed creature. You're likely going to get a creature that is also blinded, caring for young, and completely cornered. Not good. Long story short, say goodbye to your face and everyone's face who gets in the way of this creature as it violently searches for some manner of safety. And this will continue as other creatures are opened to the world in a horrific unboxing video that I would actually like to watch on YouTube. Obviously, like I said, some are probably going to be killed on the way because somebody's going to be able to defend themselves after several people have been killed. These vampires are not really in like their element. They're really surprise animals, so some are going to be killed. But inevitably, some are going to be carried across the country on excursions from countless colonists trying to manifest destiny. These individuals will quickly spread into new and diverse habitats, many of which are carrying young, vastly expanding their territory. Because remember that these mothers are using these boxes and crates to brood their young. That's how they're being separated. And it might not happen right away, but eventually these creatures are going to work their way into modern society, quote unquote, modern society. So let's get a little bit more scientific for this next part. Under introduced pressures and advantages, such as being placed in non-native habitat and increased food availability and different environmental conditions, evolution can speed up under certain circumstances. Essentially, what I'm saying is, if a species is hardy enough to survive being introduced into new environments and reproduces quickly, then the increased pressures can actually rapidly evolve new traits that exponentiate the abilities of these invasive species. To use a very specific real-world example, let's just take a quick look at the cane toad, which will be definitely in a future episode of ours. A study published in 2006 discusses how cane toad leg length has increased drastically compared to the leg length of individuals measured when they were first introduced over 60 years ago. This allows the species to spread more quickly and travel more effectively across the vast open lands of Australia, while simultaneously increasing their effectiveness as an invasive species in just a few decades. Because of how open and vast the uninhabited parts of Australia are, the cane toads, which reproduce very quickly, it's more advantageous for them to have longer legs. So because they're reproducing so quickly and the ones with longer legs are drastically being selected to be more effective at surviving, they are extremely quickly as a species evolving substantially longer leg lengths to be able to jump and move further distances and travel more quickly, which also just makes them a more aggressive invasive species. So if we take this principle, why can't we apply it to vampires? If you've got vampires being exposed to the world outside of caves and forced to seek shelter in new places and adapt to lives that are not confined to the darkness of caves, you're going to increase the pressures for them to adapt quickly and become more effective. Like I said, we already talked about this. These are hardy animals. Vampires are not like a lot of cave species, which are very sensitive to pretty much every sort of environmental change. Because they're not strictly cave dependent, they're just heavily reliant on it. They have the ability to go out. They have the abilities to have a life outside, and also it's likely that they would have evolved from a creature that lived outside of caves. Perhaps those vampires that have more potent venom or higher light tolerance would flourish and establish populations capable of more effectively surviving amongst the surface world. Think about kind of all of the adaptations I've talked about. Their teeth strength, their bite strength, their overall sensitivity to light and things like that. The ones that are going to be more stronger are just going to be the ones that are reproducing. And I guess we're kind of assuming that these creatures can reproduce fast. I didn't necessarily have an explanation for that, but we didn't necessarily evolve or talk about the evolution of these creatures. But the assumption here is that they can reproduce pretty quickly, which would increase the pressures for them to be, more adaptable. And if we think at primates in general, they're just adaptable within a single generation. They're very flexible. Look at humans. You can put a human anywhere and it's going to be able to adapt to some degree because we're just really hardy species. So any hardy species is going to be able to adapt more.
So a lot of behavioral adaptations can happen in one generation in primate species.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah, because of the brain size and the cognitive capacity.
Right, yeah. So it could be hunting methodology, or maybe they're more active at crepuscular times or something like that because there's more food availability at that time. They're more actively hunting and using their strength to take down prey rather than sneak up on prey and things of that nature. So they're becoming more effective hunters. All of this is basically leading to them becoming even more of a formidable threat as both an invasive species and just a mythical monster. Of course, they would still be mythical vampires. There might be subtle physical and behavioral changes, but even superpowered evolution isn't going to create a superpowered being. So we're still not reaching the mythical levels of vampires that we see in monster movies and things like that. But we might see slight advantages that do allow them to become extremely more successful, especially in the time period that we're setting them in right now. If you're kind of taking everything that I've talked about and looking at it from my perspective, I think the more realistic they seem, the more terrifying it sounds. While writing this, I was just kind of picturing this, and I was picturing this versus how I typically picture vampires nowadays. And they're not these altered, superpowered humans that suck solely blood, but perhaps a humanoid creature that actively seeks out the nutrients in flesh and blood by quickly and quietly subduing prey in the darkness of night. That's a terrifying prospect that seems almost plausible in the way that I've kind of described the ability of them coming to existence. If you take the human element out of something and acknowledge that these are just animals attempting to survive and actively see humans as a viable prey item, then that makes it a lot easier to see where that fear would come from. If we're talking about the myth of vampires still being spread, I feel like if we outlined vampires in the way that I've just done, you still get all of the stories about vampires, right? Because all it takes is a few people to survive an encounter with these creatures, and the stress and lack of understanding of the situation they just witnessed is immediately going to give birth to the stories of vampires as we see them today. Although I've described these vampires in a completely different way, we know that spoken word often diminishes the factual or like realism of what we're talking about, especially in high stress situations. So if people are telling what they talked about, they're going to see these crazy humans that were able to mystify people and get them to subdue to them, and they suck their blood. And, you know, somebody could even just say, you know, I saw, like, somebody has a death twitch and they're like, I saw them get up and they were a vampire, blah, blah, blah. All this kind of stuff that really just means that we still get the stories the exact same way that we hear of vampires today, but this is more realistic. For all intents and purposes, these are still blood-sucking creatures of the night that can control humans in a way that we don't understand. But does spreading out populations and diversifying really make these vampires an invasive species? Well, the theory here is that they're going to be having negative effects upon animals other than humans, because we kind of like to make everything about ourselves. In the Anthropocene, he said it, he said the name of the podcast. But of course, that's not how nature works. In fact, it's rather unlikely that these creatures would adapt specifically to prey on humans, especially since they've been specializing in native mammal species for their entire existence, well before humans were ever a passing treat. Opportunistically, sure, humans are on the menu in the same way that we're on the menu for a lot of large predators if we're in the right place at the right time. Think of crocodiles, lions, all the quote-unquote man-eaters that we hear about, where they're not typically eating humans, but given the right circumstances and pressures, they will opportunistically eat humans. That's what we're looking at here. We're not looking at something that's outwardly seeking out humans. We're looking at an actual animal that has evolved and capable of hunting humans. These vampires would likely be opportunistically eating anything that crossed their path. They have incredibly effective weaponry that has evolved from an opportunistic lifestyle. Up until their expansion, they would have had to sit and await an animal that would venture into their home. Their predatory techniques and tools are exceptionally effective for not letting anything escape, because they may be going long times between meals. This would limit growth rates, lifespan, and of course, population numbers. But here, above ground, where they've been introduced, they might still be limited by the night, but they would have tools that could confidently take down almost any animal that they encountered. The limits for population, growth rate, and energy levels are essentially removed completely, and you are left with creatures that are nearly invincible in one of the most biodiverse times on the planet. All of this means that numbers could explode in just a couple hundred years, quickly decimating the natural populations of animals and completely wiping out the most vulnerable species until you're left with just a tiny percentage of the biodiversity that was once present. Obviously, this is all fiction. There's no way that a single species could become so wildly effective and widespread that it absolutely extinguishes every other species present until entire ecosystems begin to collapse. Oh, wait. We did that. Humans did that. That's what we do.
Oh, shit.
Ooh, got him. And that's it. I'll leave the rest up to everyone's imagination to determine whether or not you think that vampires could, if given the right circumstances, become an effective invasive species. But I hope that I was able to at least make it a realistic possibility given my description.
Very fun. I like it. And hate it. And I'm scared. But I love it. All right. Well, let's take a quick pause. And then we'll boogie on over to my half of the episode. Kiki comes to say hi to you. If you guys were subscribed to our first tier, you could see my dog coming to annoy us.
Puppers.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us for the first half of this episode of The Anthropocene. We're going to take a short break.
The Anthropocene is an independent project by young ecologists hoping to educate and share interesting information about introduced species around the world. If you'd like to help us by sponsoring an episode, check out the links in the show notes.
The scene is set. It's Halloween night, and you have already given away all the candy you had to give to the little trick-or-treaters. Mostly because you ate half of it while waiting. But anyways, you decide to pull on your Reaper cloak and go for a walk around the neighborhood to look at decorations and enjoy the crisp, cool autumn air. The streets are full of hustle and bustle, laughter, and playful screams. Little demons, princesses, ghosts, and creatures of all shapes and sizes run playfully from door to door, collecting candy or a harmless scare. Trick or treat. Just as you're admiring a group of teenagers with intricately painted faces, something weird starts to happen, and you feel like something is very wrong. Right ahead of you on the street, moaning, stumbling, and snarling, causing people to take a few steps back, someone has got a bit too into character. You try to let out a soft chuckle. What a weirdo. But all of the hair on your arms is standing straight up. A little girl to your right sees the man ahead and starts to cry, and as her mother picks her up to hurry home, it all falls apart. The man snarls and leaps at someone in a honeybee costume and tears them to the ground. You stare in shock and horror as the man bites into their neck, causing blood to spew. What the fuck? This can't be happening. Then the attacked person also begins to move erratically, shoving the crazy man off of them, and also starts stumbling and growling and chasing after others in the street. You panic and climb up a nearby tree, watching a real-life terror film unfold beneath you. This was not acting or some whack job. These are real zombies.
Zombies!
Hey everybody, how's it going? Happy Halloween. Welcome to part 2 of our Halloween special.
Heck yeah. Part 2 electric boogaloo.
That was great. Nicholas had dibs vampires. So, I was thinking about what to do, and like he said, I was thinking about doing werewolves. And then I was like, oh, zombies could be neat. And my friend who's visiting me here too said, I should do zombies. And I was like, yeah, okay. So yeah, we're going to talk about it. And this is kind of a weird one. And I picked a little bit of a different model kind of than Nicholas did. And it's kind of fun because we get to see an invasive species, quote unquote, that's directly threatening humanity. So as opposed to your example with vampires, where you were more looking at them as how they still infect the environment, like our invasive species, I'm kind of letting it be how they affect normal things, but how it would affect us. So it's just kind of looking at it through a different lens, just for this horror film sort of idea.
I mean, if we're talking about an invasive species that is going to kill off all of humanity, then I am Team Zombie.
And you absolutely can be Team Zombie, and that's okay. But this is kind of how I'm setting it up. So I'm going to briefly define my idea of zombies, or Homo mortuus, because it changes a little bit in every
implying
book,
that they
every
become
film.
a different species?
I mean, that's kind of what we have to say because we're saying it's an invasive species. So
fair enough.
Yeah, it's a weird one, but we're saying that whatever this virus, this viral phenomenon is essentially is changing them into something else, because we're not going to consider them
so technically
humans
the
anymore.
virus would be the invasive species, or like a bacteria or something like that.
I think it would be, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So this is some kind of viral phenomenon is what I'm going to go with, because there's things where it's radiation, or it's all these other things. But yeah,
Gwyneth
classic...
Paltrow's candles.
Wait, what?
They turn people into zombies.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna.
Who else would buy a vagina-scented candle?
That's a thing?
You didn't know that?
Oh God.
She has a candle that literally says, "This candle smells like my vagina." I think that's the name of the candle.
All right, all right. So yeah, some kind of viral phenomenon, and the thing that I'll maintain that is pretty common through most zombie quote unquote folklore is If they bite you, you turn into a zombie afterwards. And now this is where it gets kind of fun talking about it as an invasive species, because the reproduction of zombies is the act of converting humans into zombies. So hold on to that for later, because I'm going to play around with that a little bit, but that makes it kind of fun. The zombies that I'm looking at aren't crazy fast. Like, I don't know if you've seen World War Z, like, or I Am Legend, where they're like superhumans once they become zombies. Yeah, but they're also not like the super like drag their foot zombie. It's somewhere kind of in the middle, because essentially this virus takes over the body and they have like the capacities of like a normal human.
So we're like in the realm of like The Walking Dead.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they'd look a little drunk and a little bit like,
I gotta get my cowboy hat.
yeah.
Carl.
Carl, it's an invasive species.
Carl, it's an invasive species, Carl.
God. Jesus. Okay. Anyway, so yes, so we're around The Walking Dead. And if you guys haven't seen any of those, because you're not into that kind of stuff, just imagine
me trying to run after a Thanksgiving meal.
Yeah, that works. Thank you, Nicholas. Beautiful imagery. Now, something I want to add is that I think this is something that isn't always addressed all the time. I think the body would eventually break down and like, quote unquote, die. But I think it would also take a while, because this virus or like fungus or whatever it is like, its purpose is to propagate as much as it can. So it's going to like maintain itself to a certain extent. And I mean, these zombies will probably be like consuming a bit of flesh. But essentially it's going to just be a vehicle.
Like Ophiocordyceps.
Yeah, something kind of like a cordyceps or a virus. But eventually we are going to have the assumption that, you know, the body just like won't be moving anymore, right? Because the cells and the tissues and stuff are going to break down. This was hard. I had a hard time deciding, but I'm going with the infection rate is like almost instant, because it makes it more fun for storytelling.
That's fair.
Yeah. So essentially you get bit and it like starts to take over you and you get going right away. So
now, so the assumption is that your zombies are actually, they're alive. Essentially, they're like brain zombies versus the body zombies where they're dead and then all of a sudden they like restart and then they don't require their organs and stuff. Because I, like you kind of mentioned, that never made sense to me. Like a zombie should die in the same way when you kill a human, it dies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's more like not as opposed to like the reanimated corpse. It's kind of like a takeover. So yeah, it's along the lines of like a cordyceps. And if anybody who's listening doesn't know about the cordyceps fungi, super long story short, they're really cool. Google it. They take over the body of an insect and get them to like climb up a tree or go to a different place to like release their spores in a more advantageous location. So some along that lines. Killing zombies will still work by destroying the brain, because that's always fun. So, you know, classic bullet to the head, explode the head, crush the head, chop the head off, I think would also probably work. But yeah, you gotta crush the brain. Because that's where the fungi viral thing is going to be still kind of like making the body do the thing. Yeah. So I structured this kind of a little bit like the normal episodes. So I started with what is the zombie's natural habitat or origin. So the only reason I really included this is I just checked into it, and the folklore around zombies is all over the place now, but it actually originally comes from Haiti with ideas around voodoo, which is like the reanimation.
These stories.
Yeah. So like it's around the reanimation of corpses and voodoos. And this is actually rooted even further back in like African ideas and mythology around like reanimations of corpses and things. So for the sake of our like case study today, I'm just going to say that they came from Haiti, and that's like the origin of zombies. And now they are invasive around the rest of the world except for Antarctica and the most northern Arctic, just like lawn grass. So where you can find lawn grass, you can find zombies.
Because the bodies would cease to function in the cold is what we're going off of.
Yeah, the Antarctica one, I'm going with like accessibility too as well, because that's pretty hard to disperse to. And then, like also accessibility to really far northern places, really small populations of humans to convert into zombies. And like, also to like the functionality of the bodies in the cold. Maybe the polar bears would eat zombies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Could be, actually. Yeah. Awesome. What would make a zombie, our zombie, like a good invasive species? So first off, it has like a super high reproduction rate. Chomp chomp baby, right? Essentially. It's just gotta bite someone and it makes a baby because it's just passing it on to like another species. Super low resource requirements because they're essentially just like a vehicle for this virus at the time. So, maybe they would be consuming like a little bit of flesh because that's still fun. I mean, we can't get rid of the zombies eating brains, or there's no point.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. Brains.
Yeah. And also because the vehicle is a human, like we have a high toleration to like a huge range of climates. Like they're not going to be like super restricted by a bit of cold or a bit of heat. So, and they should be able to go to high and low altitudes, right?
Plus, you assume those zombies are infecting people wearing the proper attire for wherever they're infecting those people. So if we're looking at like heat preservation or something like that, then yeah, those zombies are probably going to be effective at traveling because whoever, if they're operating within the confines of what a human body can do, then if you're infecting humans who are trying their best to live as comfortably as possible, then it's going to be advantageous.
Exactly. The only ones that are bad are the ones that like convert the like girl that's out at like minus 35 with like stiletto heels to go to the club.
Yeah. Me.
Yeah. Beautiful. I want to see that. Maybe you can wear stiletto heels with your all
my
leather.
Darkling costume. Oh, my calves would look fantastic.
I bet you they'd look great, and I'm sure a zombie would want to eat them.
Juicy calf meat.
That's so weird.
That was my nickname in high school, so it does track.
For real?
No.
Oh God, I was like, I'm so sorry.
Everybody who's listening, laugh at Kirsten, please.
Well, I don't know. Kids in high school are weird, man. Like people get weird nicknames.
It's like a joke. I can't believe you've never heard anybody say that.
I guess, yeah.
That's like one of my number one jokes. It's why people aren't friends with me.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm still your friend.
My chair fell down. I won't stay up.
Play by play. Nicholas slowly drops off the screen down to the floor.
I'm just slowly getting farther away from the microphone.
And a lot of invasive species that we talk about, like things like fire ants, and even, we talked about like things that use human structures. Zombies are the furthest end of the spectrum of human commensal because literally they cannot reproduce or keep going on without their direct prey, which are humans. And like I said, I think they would still eat some carrion and things, but they're mostly going to be affecting people.
Yeah, because the cordyceps fungus, I was going to say it's species specific. I don't know that. Because there's different types. Because there's Ophiocordyceps, which I think is the general family of them. So they have different hosts and things like that. So let me generally speak so I can cover my ass essentially. Because I don't have the references up in front of me.
Yeah.
But they target similar clades of animals and stuff like that. So maybe...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're quite specific. Yeah.
Right. So it might not be species specific because we're talking insects and nothing species specific there because there are so many damn insects.
But order specific or family specific.
Yeah. And with humans, it's not like there's a lot of primates running around. You know what I mean? So yeah, I agree with you that I think this would make sense that really nothing else would be affected by this. It would just be human centered.
I kind of want to add zombie monkeys now though, because that would be super scary.
I mean, I just picture the little is it the capuchin monkey from? Well, I was thinking the capuchin monkey that they used in Pirates of the Caribbean that begins a zombie.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Isn't he? Yeah, he's a zombie. Yeah. Horrifying. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, zombies are really good invasive. The only thing is there's one that's kind of half and half, and it's the dispersion because not so much. Like, they're not like flying insects that can disperse like super readily. However, like the human body does have a ton of endurance, and they could probably swim, I'm gonna say, like if we're using the like that it takes over the body to move. So they could disperse quite well, but not as well as something like flying insects or things that are tinier or blow in the wind and that kind of thing. So they have a lot going for them though. High reproduction rate, they can tolerate a whole bunch of other stuff, and they do really well in big urban centers, and there's a lot of those. So yeah.
Yeah.
What are the problems with zombies? Well, like a minor one.
The flesh eating and turning into more zombies.
Exactly.
They don't ask for consent.
Oh, that is true. Always ask before you bite.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't kink
Lay
shame,
down a safe word.
but you do need consent.
Oh no, of course, yeah. Just other than their lack of consent, they could potentially push out other carrion species like vultures and mesopredators that are trying to like eat prey as they're like going along looking for humans. And they are like this extreme form of competition if we're looking at their impact on humans. Because, you know, sometimes we have different types of competition from invasive species where it's like direct or indirect. But this one is humans are the prey species. And not only is it the prey species, but you directly turn the competing species into one of your species. It's like as if an invasive preyed on something and then just popped out a baby immediately.
If zombies have like a preference for like food, and say like, I don't know, like zombies were preferential to priests or, you know, people in churches, would that make them their prey species?
Oh God. You're going to hell for that. No.
Ha!
I mean, they would probably congregate to churches.
I ripped my headphones out of the plug. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Are you back?
Yeah, we're good. I'm back.
Okay. So yeah, essentially you have a thing that eats you or like kills something and then directly pops out a baby. So it would be like as if there was a bird that was invasive that was like super problematic, and not only does it like eat an invasive or like a native praying mantis, but then as soon as it eats it, it instantly pops out a baby. So you can just imagine like the reproductive rate and competition pressure is like way more than normal. Also, they congregate in like super large groups. It would be like ant super colonies of zombies because they would not compete with one another. It is very likely that they would move together and that they wouldn't have any issues between each other. So this is another like looking at it from an invasive perspective. They would just congregate and like keep going, and they're not going to have any direct competition. So they're going to thrive even more so. Kind of like when we did in the fire ant episode where they are super aggressive towards other ant species, but they're bros with their own. So it just makes them even more exaggerated. So that's kind of the layout of what we're looking at. So we got these zombies. They can disperse fairly readily. They can live anywhere. And their like quote unquote reproduction rate is just like super high. And it's not that easy to eradicate them except for like direct culling. And then the only other like control method that I brainstormed up with my friend is like
TNR for zombies is effective. It is effective means of control of zombies.
Just a quick reminder that TNR is trap, neuter, and release.
Cut their dicks off, send them out in the world. What are they gonna do?
Well, no, you could like take the zombie and put a muzzle on it and then release it.
Yeah.
That would be the like the zombie equivalent of TNR.
There would 150,000% be a Facebook group against the killing of zombies because we should adopt them all. We can all give them a home. They're all people just like us.
So this is funny because this kind of gets into another thing where control could be problematic, because say we come out with a vaccine against the fungi or this virus, which would be a great control method, right? In theory. But we all know how well that works and how willing
What are you talking about? I have no frame of reference in the real world for anything like this within the last few years. It's not something that I can like picture in my head. Wouldn't everybody
Right.
be on board with vaccinating themselves against potential harmful things so that we could get that herd immunity? I don't think we live in a world, Kirsten, where anything other than that fact would happen.
So just for the sake of pretending, Nicholas.
Right, yeah. This is mythical world we're operating in here. So I guess you're
yeah.
right. You're right. My mistake.
Yeah, the likelihood of isolating a virus and like creating a vaccine or virus or fungi in the middle of this crisis is improbable. Getting it distributed and then also getting people to take it would probably be an issue. Having people say that it's going to turn you into a zombie,
especially since it's a suppository.
Oh, yes. Exactly. So, what is a possible solution? Good news, friends. Finally, all the guns in America make sense. Yay!
You hear that, Republicans? Now's your time to shine. We're on your side.
So essentially, it would just have to be like mass culling. Like you'd have to protect civilians and people and like keep them locked indoors, like this like insane curfew lockdown. And then just be
and
like...
everybody would obey that lockdown without question for the safety of themselves and others. I'm not even a little bit salty. Not even a little bit.
I'm like so triggered right now. Yeah, and then you'd have to go around with like mass killings and, I don't know, blow up some stadiums like they did in World War Z, and just until it's like totally wiped out. And then you'd have to see if it didn't like resurface again. But essentially... if this like happened in this way, like it'd be bad.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so that's what I had for my little fun creative writing project with zombies, and I really enjoyed doing it. It was neat.
Well, I think you did it really well. I still think it falls within. I did more of like the storytelling kind of aspect of it, I think, which is where we kind of differed. For anybody who's still listening, after the Republican joke, which is probably most of you, because basically Kirsten and I, we loosely discussed this idea a few days ago when I got one of my just stupid brain sparks where I just come up with an idea randomly in the shower and text her.
Were you thinking about me in the shower, Nicholas?
Yeah, shower
you were thinking about me in the shower.
You're gonna get me in trouble. You're gonna get yourself in trouble. No wonder we're rated mature or whatever we are on the podcast things.
Explicit. Hey, I only said what the fuck once.
Yeah,
twice now.
And I haven't said it once, surprisingly.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for tuning in and coming back, and we're gonna see what we can do to get some more stuff out. Those of you waiting for the urban wildlife episode that have sent me in their stuff, it is like 90% done, so that should be out either the next one or the one after that, so stay tuned.
Yes, and please let us know which one you think is more of an effective invasive species. Who did a better job of creating a mythical invasive species? I genuinely want to know. If you never comment on any of our other episodes, tell us about this one. DM us on Instagram, message us on our podcast boards where we stream and all that kind of stuff. Tell us. I want to know who did better, or who you think did better, or if we're both amazing. Which we already know.
Not even necessarily like who did better storytelling.
I want to know who did better.
One...
Who's the winner?
Okay.
Who's in first place? Tell me. Okay. It's a competition.
Okay. Nicholas wants first place. I want to know which you think would be a better invasive species between the two. But maybe do both. Who is cuter and who had the better invasive species? No, just kidding. All right. We're droning on. I love you all.
No, never.
Thank you so much. It's been so nice to see Nicholas again.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. It's been very nice to see myself in the podcast camera corner. Oh, you too.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining in, and we will resume our typical episodes next sometime.
Someday.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Anthropocene.
Be sure to follow us on all social media and feel free to reach out to us with any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future episodes or species you'd like to see us cover.